there's this medieval book that seems like it was made to challenge anyone who tries to make sense of it. It's a real ancient book that's been studied for centuries. Yet it remains stubbornly silent. The pages show plants that seem like remedies, or maybe poisons, diagrams that hint at the heavens, the human body, and even time and women bathing in strange pools, as if they were part of some ritual treatment, or maybe something far darker. And in the middle of all this, there's writing that behaves like a real language, yet nobody has been able to read it for centuries. For a long time, people thought this manuscript was either a hoax or just some relic, an impossible relic or an unsolvable riddle. But there's one detail that makes everything even more unsettling. The object itself is real, the parchment is ancient, and the structure of the book is genuine. It's not just a pretty legend dreamed up centuries later. And that changes everything. If these pages aren't some modern prank, then what exactly were they trying to preserve? What secrets were they hiding back then? Tell me in the comments, what's your theory? What if it's like a medical manual, a health almanac, an apothecary's notebook, a healing system connected to the stars, or some knowledge that, in the 15th century, could easily be confused with alchemy, heresy, or witchcraft? And the story gets darker when you realize this book passed through important hands and was linked to emperors, scholars, and professional code breakers, and yet, nobody has managed to definitively crack it. The more serious minds handled the manuscript, the more it seemed to resist, as if its true power wasn't in what it showed, but in the way it kept slipping away. And that's when the questions begin to line up. Who wrote this book? Why was it produced anonymously? Why does it mix herbs, symbols, baths, vessels, and a script that seems alive, but won't let itself be translated? Are we looking at a lost medical treatise, an absurdly sophisticated cipher, a stroke of genius, or a manuscript created to hide something that couldn't be shared freely? Before we try to answer, we need to go back in time, because the mystery of the Voynich doesn't start inside the pages. It begins with the way this book traveled through history. See, the Voynich Manuscript didn't become one of history's greatest enigmas just because no one can read it. It became that because its very trajectory seems designed to heighten fascination without dispelling the darkness. Instead of a clear lineage, you get a trail full of important owners, letters, rumors, prestigious connections, and long gaps. And that matters, because a big mystery doesn't survive just because of what it is. It survives through the way it's passed from hand to hand each time, wrapped in more value, authority, and mist. In the most verifiable part of the story, one of the first key names is Georg Baresch in Prague. It's there that the manuscript comes onto the radar of people interested in obscure texts and code breaking. Then Athanasius Kircher and Johannes Marcus Marci appear, and you can already feel an important shift. The Voynich stops being just a strange object, kept in silence, and starts circulating as an intellectual challenge. It's no longer just a weird book. Now it's a problem worthy of important people, and that already begins to inflate the myth. The letter Marci sent to Kircher in the mid-17th century is decisive in this transformation. It doesn't solve anything, doesn't translate a line, doesn't prove who wrote it, but it does something perhaps even more powerful. It frames the perfect story. A book studied without success, passed along to someone who might be the only person capable of deciphering it. It's almost like a ready-made script. From then on, the manuscript no longer seems merely indecipherable. It starts to feel like it's been chosen to remain indecipherable. And that's when the names that feed the aura enter. Rudolph II, Jacob de Tepenek, Roger Bacon, each adds a layer. Rudolph injects power, luxury, extravagance, and a fascination with the rare. Tepenek heightens the sense that the book circulated in intellectually valuable circles, and Roger Bacon gives the manuscript something even more dangerous: the ideal signature. A learned friar tied to science, experimentation, and the almost legendary image of a distant genius. It was the perfect name for an impossible book. The problem is the parchment dates to the early 15th century, and Roger Bacon lived in the 13th. So the attribution is seductive, but doesn't hold up. Yet even that collapse feeds the myth, because when a mystery stays alive, even after losing a beautiful explanation, it becomes even harder to kill. Centuries later, Wilfred Voynich understood the power of that haze. He bought the manuscript in 1912 through a Jesuit college in Rome, and under his name, the codex gained worldwide fame. It's no accident the book came to be known. By the antiquarian surname, the modern circulation of the manuscript almost merges with the way it was presented to the world. It wasn't enough that it was indecipherable. It needed to feel monumental, to sound like something pulled from history with bare hands. A relic bigger than the answer itself. But the fame of the Voynich wasn't built just by collectors, old letters, and charming hypotheses. It was also fueled by real failures. One of the most important names here is William Friedman, one of the great code breakers of the 20th century. Associated with cracking the Purple Code during World War II, he spent decades trying to solve the manuscript, and didn't succeed. That detail completely changes the weight of the story, because from then on, the Voynich doesn't just defeat curious people, or internet mystics. It resists people trained to dismantle complex cryptographic systems. And that shifts the manuscript out of the realm of fun mystery and into the territory of maybe there's something really tough hidden here, inside. After Voynich's death, the manuscript ended up being donated to the Beinecke Rare Book and Manuscript Library at Yale in 1969, and that sets up a stark contrast. On one hand, an object surrounded by rumors, legendary attributions, and centuries of speculation. On the other, a small, worn book cataloged and preserved by a major institution. The Voynich doesn't endure because it was hidden too well. It endures because even when it's put under the light, it stays intact as an enigma. And few things feed a myth better than a real object that keeps resisting when everyone finally gets to look at it. It's here that the story shifts direction, because when the glow of the legend fades, the object itself gains weight. The question stops being which famous name might have written this, and becomes, what does the manuscript show on its own? And at that point, we need to open the book, not like someone about to solve an easy case, but like someone stepping into a place that seems organized by some logic, and yet still feels off. What does the manuscript show? What does the writing hide? And what is still up for debate? Before we look at the strangest images, there's something important. The Voynich isn't treated today as a simple modern fraud. The strongest evidence against that is the dating of the parchment to the early 15th century, and the analyses of inks and pigments push the same idea. The text and drawings seem to belong to the same material universe, with characteristics compatible with a historical production. That doesn't solve the book, not even close, but it changes the nature of the problem. The question is no longer whether this object really exists. Now it's why a real ancient object still seems so impossible, since nobody has presented a widely accepted decipherment. The most honest way to enter the Voynich is through the images. And I ask you, could it be alien? Some people say yes. What do you think? The first thing that stands out is that it doesn't look chaotic. On the contrary, the book seems divided into clear thematic sections. A large herbal part, another astronomical or astrological, the section of baths, cosmological areas, pharmaceutical pages, and at the end, passages almost entirely text, often called recipes. This is decisive because a manuscript that seems organized by themes resists the idea of pure graphic nonsense much better. There's some kind of order there. The problem is we're still on the outside of that order. The first big room in this inner world is the one with the plants. On many pages, a large plant appears surrounded by text, as if each drawing comes with an explanation. But these plants follow a deeply unsettling logic. Some seem almost recognizable. You look and think maybe you're seeing a lily, a violet, a medicinal leaf, a familiar root. Yet that recognition never quite fits. There's always something off, exaggerated, impossible. It's as if the manuscript imitates the visual language of medieval herbals, but refuses to fully belong to that genre, and that creates a strong feeling of frustrated closeness. It seems familiar enough to draw you in, strange enough to slip away. In the medieval world, that wasn't a small thing. Plants were tied to healing, to treating the body, to preparing remedies, but also to poison, to risk and to fear. The same leaf that healed could kill. Now tell me, had you heard of the Voynich before? Have you seen any plants like these? Have you ever read a book that showed images of ancient plants? Well, we've got a lot to talk about and a lot to see. We need to unravel this mystery. Help me on this journey. Bring evidence, texts, photos. Let's work together to uncover it. Follow me and share with people who might help us, or who are just as curious. Follow me for part 2 of this video. For them, plants were medicine to heal the body. They used them to make remedies, and sometimes poisons. There was always risk. The same leaf that healed could kill. Tell me, had you ever heard of the Voynich? Ever seen plants like these before? Ever read one? Those ancient books with sketches of herbs? There's so much to talk about and to see. We need to unravel this mystery. Help me on this journey. Bring evidence. Send texts, photos. Let's help solve it together. Follow me and share this with friends, especially if they're curious too. Catch part 2 of this video.